The torn calico dress had once been blue, but 3 years of desert sun and alkali dust had faded it to the color of old bones. And when Marianne Sullivan walked into the Silver Spur Saloon in Prescott, Arizona territory that scorching afternoon in July of 1878, every eye in the room could see the long rip running up the left side that she had mended with mismatched thread at least a dozen times. She was not there for work, though the saloon girls eyed her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. She was there because Mr. Henderson, who owned the mercantile, had told her that the saloon keeper sometimes needed help with washing glasses and scrubbing floors, and Marianne Sullivan needed money more desperately than she needed pride. Her father had died 6 months earlier, leaving her alone in a one-room shack at the edge of town, with nothing but debts and the clothes on her back. She had sold everything else, piece by piece, just to buy flour and beans. The cowboy at the far table noticed her before anyone else spoke. He was tall, lean in the way men get when they spend long days in the saddle, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water after a storm. His name was James Holloway, though most folks called him Hollis, and he had been playing poker with 3 other ranch hands for the better part of 2 hours. He was winning, but not by much, and he had been considering cashing out when the girl in the torn dress walked through the door. Something about the way she held her head up, despite the obvious poverty of her circumstances, made him forget about the cards in his hand. She had auburn hair pulled back in a simple knot and freckles across her nose that the sun had darkened. She could not have been more than 20 years old, and there was a determined set to her jaw that suggested she had been through harder things than walking into a saloon full of strangers. "Can I help you, miss?" The saloon keeper, a burly man named Tom Garrett, did not sound particularly welcoming. "I heard you might need someone to help with cleaning," Marianne said. Her voice was steady, though Hollis could see her hands were clasped tight in front of her. "I am a hard worker. I do not drink, and I do not cause trouble." Tom Garrett looked her up and down, his expression skeptical. "This is not really the kind of place for a respectable girl." "I need work," Marianne said simply. "I can start today." One of the men at the bar laughed, not unkindly, but with the sort of amusement that made Marianne's cheeks flush pink. Hollis felt something hot and protective flare in his chest, which surprised him. He had been in Arizona territory for 5 years, working various ranches, and he had learned to mind his own business. But there was something about this girl that made him want to set down his cards and do something foolish. "Tell you what," Tom Garrett said after a moment, "you can start tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock sharp. I will pay you 50 cents a day, and you can have whatever food is left over from the kitchen. But you stay out of the main room when customers are here. You do your work early, before things get busy, or late, after everyone has gone home. Understood?" Marianne nodded quickly, relief flooding her face. "Thank you. I will be here at 6. She turned to leave, and as she did, the rip in her dress gaped wider, revealing the pale skin of her thigh. She did not seem to notice, or perhaps she had simply grown used to it. Hollis watched her go, and then he laid down his cards. "I am out," he said, gathering his modest winnings. One of the other players, a ranch hand named Cooper, grinned at him. "You are quitting while you are ahead? That is not like you, Hollis." Hollis did not answer. He pocketed his money and headed for the door, stepping out into the blazing afternoon sun. The girl was already halfway down the dusty street, walking quickly despite the heat. He followed at a distance, telling himself he just wanted to make sure she got home safely, though he knew that was only half true. Prescott was a rough town, though not as rough as some. It had been the territorial capital until just the year before, when that honor had been moved to Tucson, and there was still a sense of disappointed ambition hanging over the place. The streets were wide and dusty, lined with false-fronted buildings and the occasional adobe structure left over from the Mexican period. Cowboys, miners, and drifters filled the saloons at night, and respectable women generally stayed indoors after dark. Marianne walked all the way to the eastern edge of town, where the buildings gave way to scattered shacks and the land opened up into scrub brush and rocky hills. The shack she stopped at was barely standing. The roof sagged in the middle, and one of the walls had been patched with old boards that did not quite match. A small garden plot beside it looked like it had been recently tended, though the plants were struggling in the heat. Hollis stopped at a respectful distance and watched as she went inside. He stood there for a long moment, thinking. Then he turned and headed back toward town, walking faster now, with purpose. The mercantile was still open, though Mr. Henderson was getting ready to close up for the day. He was an older man, balding and bespectacled, with the sort of careful neutrality that shopkeepers cultivate when they deal with all kinds of people. "Help you with something, Hollis?" he asked, looking up from his ledger. "I need to buy some fabric," Hollis said. "Enough for a few dresses." Mr. Henderson raised his eyebrows, but did not ask questions. "What kind of fabric are you looking for?" Hollis realized he had no idea. He had never bought fabric in his life. "Something practical," he said finally. "Not too fancy, but good quality. And I need it to be ready-made if you have it, or I need to find someone who can sew." Mr. Henderson rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Mrs. Chen, over on 3rd Street, she does sewing, makes dresses, shirts, all kinds of things. If you buy the fabric here, I can send word to her, and she can have something ready in a few days. How many dresses are you thinking?" 3, Hollis said. He did not know why he picked that number, except that it seemed right. 1 to wear, 1 to wash, 1 to mend, his mother used to say, back when he was a boy in Texas and she was still alive. "That is going to cost you," Mr. Henderson warned. "Fabric is not cheap, and Mrs. Chen will want payment for her work too." Hollis thought about the money in his pocket, the modest winnings from the poker game, and the wages he had saved from the past few months working at the Triple H ranch. He did not have a lot, but he had enough. "I can pay." They spent the next 20 minutes selecting fabric. Mr. Henderson showed him bolts of calico, cotton, and even a few pieces of wool, though that was too heavy for the Arizona heat. Hollis chose 3 different patterns, one in a soft green that reminded him of spring grass, one in a warm brown with tiny white flowers, and one in a deep blue that he thought would look nice with auburn hair. He did not let himself think too hard about why that mattered. Mr. Henderson wrote everything down and promised to send word to Mrs. Chen first thing in the morning. "She will need measurements, though. Do you know the size of the lady these are for?" Hollis hesitated. "About this tall," he said, holding his hand up to approximately Marianne's height. "Slender. Maybe ask Mrs. Chen to make them a little loose so they fit comfortably." Mr. Henderson gave him a knowing look, but said nothing. Hollis paid for the fabric, counting out the bills carefully, and then headed back out into the fading light. That night, lying in his bunk at the ranch bunkhouse, he thought about the girl in the torn dress and wondered if he had just done something very foolish or very right. He did not even know her name. The next morning, Marianne was at the Silver Spur at 6 o'clock exactly, just as she had promised. Tom Garrett set her to work immediately, showing her where the wash buckets were kept and how he liked the glasses cleaned. The work was hard and hot, even in the early morning, but Marianne did not complain. She scrubbed floors, washed glasses until her hands were raw, and hauled bucket after bucket of dirty water out to the alley behind the saloon. Hollis rode into town around mid-morning, after finishing his chores at the ranch. He told himself he just needed to check on something at the mercantile, but his feet carried him to the saloon first. He peered through the window and saw her on her hands and knees, scrubbing the floorboards with fierce concentration. Her hair had come loose from its knot and hung around her face in damp tendrils. He felt that same protective surge again, mixed with something else, something warmer and more complicated. He turned away before she could see him and headed to the mercantile. Mr. Henderson greeted him with a nod. "I sent word to Mrs. Chen this morning. She said she can have the dresses ready by Saturday if you can get her the measurements." "Saturday," Hollis repeated. That was 4 days away. Sunday was the day after. He had told himself he wanted to get the dresses to her by Sunday, though he had no idea why that particular deadline mattered. "How do I get measurements?" "Well, the lady usually comes in herself, and Mrs. Chen takes them with a measuring tape. But if that is not possible, Mrs. Chen said she can work from a comparison. Do you have a sister or someone about the same size who could stand in?" Hollis shook his head. "I will figure something out." He left the mercantile and walked slowly back toward the saloon. He needed to talk to the girl, which meant he needed to know her name, which meant he needed a reason to introduce himself that did not sound completely insane. He could not very well walk up to her and say, "Hello, I am buying you dresses because I saw your torn one and decided to be your benefactor." That would terrify her, or worse, offend her. He was still trying to work out what to say when she emerged from the saloon, looking exhausted. It was not even noon yet, but she had clearly been working hard. There was a smudge of dirt on her cheek, and her dress was wet in patches from the wash water. "Excuse me, miss," Hollis said, stepping forward before he could lose his nerve. She turned, startled, and he saw recognition flicker in her eyes. She had noticed him in the saloon the day before then. "Yes? I am James Holloway," he said, pulling off his hat. "Most folks call me Hollis. I just wanted to introduce myself." She looked wary, but not unfriendly. "I am Marianne Sullivan. Pleased to meet you, Miss Sullivan." He hesitated, then pressed on. "I hope you do not think me forward, but I noticed you are new to working at the saloon. If you ever need anything, or if anyone gives you trouble, I want you to know you can come find me. I work at the Triple H Ranch, just north of town." Marianne's expression softened slightly. "That is kind of you, Mr. Holloway, but I can take care of myself." "I am sure you can," Hollis said quickly. "I just wanted you to know." There was a pause, and then Marianne said, "I should get home. I have things to do before I come back this evening." Hollis nodded. "Of course. Can I walk with you? It is a hot day, and I am headed that direction anyway." That was a lie, but she did not need to know that. Marianne looked like she wanted to say no, but after a moment, she nodded. "All right." They walked together through the dusty streets, not saying much at first. Hollis kept stealing glances at her, noting the tired lines around her eyes, the way she favored her right foot slightly as if her left boot had a hole in it. She was even prettier in the daylight, despite the exhaustion and the worn dress. "Have you been in Prescott long?" he asked, trying to make conversation. "All my life," Marianne said. "My father was a prospector. He came here during the gold rush, back in the 60s. Never struck it rich, but he kept trying. He died this past winter." "I am sorry," Hollis said, and he meant it. Marianne shrugged, but he could see the grief in her eyes. "He was sick for a long time. I took care of him as best I could, but there was not much I could do. After he passed, I found out he owed money all over town. I have been trying to pay it back ever since." "That is a heavy burden for someone on their own," Hollis said. "I am managing," Marianne said, but there was a brittleness to her voice that suggested she was only barely managing. They reached her shack, and she stopped at the door. "Thank you for walking with me, Mr. Holloway." "Hollis," he said. "Please, just call me Hollis." She gave him a small smile. "All right, Hollis." "Miss Sullivan," he said, taking a breath. "Would you mind if I measured you?" Her eyes went wide, and he realized immediately how that sounded. "Not like that," he said quickly, his face burning. "I mean, I know someone who does sewing, and I thought, that is, I wanted to see if she could make you something, as a kindness. You have been through a lot, and I thought maybe a new dress or two might help." Marianne's face went from shocked to guarded. "I do not need charity, Mr. Holloway." "It is not charity," Hollis said, though of course it was. "It is just a friend helping a friend." "We are not friends," Marianne said, not unkindly but firmly. "We just met." Hollis felt like an idiot. He had pushed too hard, too fast. "You are right. I am sorry. I did not mean to offend you." Marianne's expression softened. "I am not offended. I appreciate the thought. But I do not accept gifts from strangers, no matter how well-meaning." She went inside and closed the door, leaving Hollis standing in the heat, feeling like the biggest fool in Arizona territory. But James Holloway was not a man who gave up easily. He had been thrown from horses, kicked by cattle, and once shot at by a claim jumper, and he had survived all of it through sheer stubbornness. He was not about to let a little thing like wounded pride stop him now. He went back to the mercantile and asked Mr. Henderson if he knew anyone who might be able to estimate Marianne's measurements without her knowing. Mr. Henderson gave him a long look, then said, "You are determined to do this, are you not?" "Yes, sir," Hollis said. Mr. Henderson sighed. "Mrs. Chen is good at estimating. If you can describe the lady in detail, she can probably get close enough. The dresses might need a little taking in or letting out, but they will fit well enough." Hollis spent the next 15 minutes describing Marianne to Mr. Henderson, who wrote everything down with the careful precision of a man who had done this before: height, build, general proportions. Hollis tried to be as accurate as possible without sounding like a creep, which was harder than he expected. When he was done, Mr. Henderson said, "I will take this to Mrs. Chen today. She will have the dresses ready by Saturday afternoon. But, Hollis, you should know that this is going to cost you almost everything you have saved." "I know," Hollis said, "and there is no guarantee this girl is going to accept them. She might see it as an insult." "I know that too," Hollis said. Mr. Henderson shook his head. You are either the kindest fool I have ever met or the most stubborn. Maybe both. Hollis grinned. Probably both. Over the next few days, Hollis made it a point to run into Marianne whenever he was in town. He would tip his hat and say hello, maybe walk with her for a bit if she let him. He learned that she had been teaching herself to read from an old Bible her mother had left her, that she loved the smell of rain even though it hardly ever rained in Prescott, and that she had a quiet sense of humor that caught him off guard sometimes. She learned that he was from Texas originally, that he had left home at 17 after his parents died of fever, and that he had been drifting ever since, working ranches wherever he could find work. He told her about the time he had been chased by a bear in the mountains, and the time he had won $100 in a poker game, only to lose it all the next night. She laughed at his stories, and the sound of it made something in his chest feel lighter. On Friday evening, he found her sitting outside her shack, mending a hole in her dress by the fading light. She looked up when he approached, and for the first time, she smiled at him without reservation. "You keep showing up," she said. "Is that a problem?" Hollis asked, sitting down on the ground near her, careful to keep a respectful distance. "No," Marianne said. "I suppose I am getting used to it." They talked until the stars came out, about everything and nothing. Hollis told her about the ranch, about the horses he worked with, about the way the land looked in the early morning when the sun was just coming up over the hills. Marianne told him about her father, about the good times before he got sick, about how she used to help him pan for gold in the creek, and how they never found much, but it did not matter because they were together. When it got too dark to see, Hollis stood up to leave. "I will see you tomorrow," he said. "Will you?" Marianne asked, and there was something in her voice, something almost hopeful. "If you want me to," Hollis said. "I think I do," Marianne said quietly. Hollis rode back to the ranch that night, feeling like he could take on the world. On Saturday afternoon, he rode into town and picked up the 3 dresses from Mrs. Chen. She had wrapped them carefully in brown paper and tied them with string. They were beautiful, even folded up like that. He could see the careful stitching, the neat hems, the little details that showed Mrs. Chen had put real care into her work. "I hope she likes them," Mrs. Chen said, handing them over. "I made them with love." "Thank you," Hollis said, paying her the last of his saved wages. He did not regret it for a second. He waited until Sunday morning to bring them to Marianne. It was early, the town just starting to wake up, and the air was still cool from the night. He found her outside her shack, feeding scraps to a scraggly chicken she had somehow acquired. "Morning, Miss Sullivan," he said. She turned, surprised. "Hollis, I did not expect to see you so early." "I brought you something," he said, dismounting and pulling the wrapped bundle from his saddlebag. Marianne looked at the package, then at him, her expression wary. "Hollis, I told you I do not accept charity." "I know," he said, "but I am asking you to make an exception. Just this once." He held out the package, and after a long moment, Marianne took it. Her hands were shaking slightly as she untied the string and pulled back the paper. When she saw the dresses, her breath caught. "Hollis," she whispered, "you should not have." "Maybe not," he said, "but I wanted to. You work so hard, Marianne. You deserve to have something nice, something that is just yours." Marianne looked up at him, and there were tears in her eyes. "No one has ever done anything like this for me before." "Then it is about time someone did," Hollis said. She clutched the dresses to her chest, and Hollis could see the emotions warring on her face. Pride, gratitude, disbelief, and something else, something softer. "I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything," Hollis said. "Just accept them, please." Marianne nodded, wiping at her eyes. "All right. Thank you, Hollis. Thank you so much." He wanted to reach out and pull her into his arms, but he knew it was too soon for that. Instead, he just smiled and said, "You are welcome." She invited him inside, which was the first time he had been in her shack. It was even smaller than he had imagined, barely big enough for a narrow bed, a small table, and a wood stove. But it was clean, and there were little touches that showed Marianne's personality. Wildflowers in a jar on the table, a neatly folded quilt on the bed, the old Bible she had told him about sitting on a shelf made from scrap wood. "It is not much," Marianne said, looking embarrassed. "It is a home," Hollis said. "That is more than a lot of people have." Marianne laid the dresses out on the bed, smoothing them with careful hands. I cannot believe you did this, she said again. How did you even afford it? I had some money saved, Hollis said, which was not quite a lie. He had money saved. He just did not have it anymore. And it was worth every penny. Marianne turned to face him, and the look in her eyes made his heart skip. Why? She asked. Why would you do this for me? You barely know me. Hollis took a breath. Because from the moment I saw you walk into that saloon, I could not stop thinking about you. Because you were the bravest, strongest person I have ever met. Because you deserve to be taken care of, and I want to be the one to do it. The words hung in the air between them, too big and too honest. Hollis half expected Marianne to tell him to leave, to say he was being ridiculous, that they had only known each other for a few days. Instead, she closed the distance between them and kissed him. It was a soft kiss, tentative and sweet, and it lasted only a moment. But when she pulled back, Hollis felt like the whole world had shifted on its axis. I have been thinking about you too, Marianne said, her cheeks flushed. I tried not to, but I could not help it. Hollis grinned, feeling like the luckiest man alive. So, what do we do now? I suppose we see where this goes, Marianne said, smiling back at him. And that was how it started, in a tiny shack on the edge of Prescott, Arizona territory in the summer of 1878. A cowboy and a girl in a torn dress, taking a chance on something neither of them had been looking for, but both of them desperately needed. Over the next few weeks, Hollis and Marianne spent every spare moment together. He would ride into town after his work at the ranch was done, and they would walk together through the dusty streets, talking about their pasts and their hopes for the future. Marianne wore her new dresses with obvious pride, and Hollis loved seeing the way her face lit up every time she put one on. The town noticed, of course. In a place like Prescott, where everyone knew everyone else's business, a cowboy courting a girl was news. Some people were happy for them. Mr. Henderson would smile knowingly whenever Hollis came into the mercantile, and Mrs. Chen stopped Marianne on the street one day to tell her how lovely she looked in the dresses. Tom Garrett, the saloon keeper, grumbled about Hollis distracting his best worker, but did not seem genuinely upset. But there were others who were less kind. Some of the women in town, the ones who considered themselves respectable, looked at Marianne with suspicion because she worked at a saloon, even if she only scrubbed floors. And some of the men looked at her with a different kind of interest, the kind that made Hollis's fists clench and his jaw tighten. One evening, about 3 weeks after he had given her the dresses, Hollis was waiting outside the Silver Spur for Marianne to finish her work when a man he did not recognize stumbled out of the saloon. He was drunk, weaving on his feet, and when he saw Hollis, he sneered. "You that cowboy who is sweet on the cleaning girl?" the man slurred. "What if I am?" Hollis said, keeping his voice level. The man laughed. "You are wasting your time, friend. A girl who works in a saloon is not the marrying kind, if you know what I mean." Hollis felt his temper flare. "Watch your mouth." "Or what?" the man said, stepping closer. "You going to fight me over some used-up little—" He did not get to finish the sentence because Hollis's fist connected with his jaw. The man went down hard, sprawling in the dust, and Hollis stood over him, breathing hard. "You do not talk about her that way," Hollis said, his voice low and dangerous. "You do not even think about her that way. Understand?" The man scrambled to his feet and ran off without answering. Hollis stood there for a moment, trying to calm himself down. He was not a violent man by nature, but the thought of anyone speaking about Marianne like that made him see red. Marianne came out of the saloon a few minutes later, and she took one look at Hollis's face and said, "What happened?" "Nothing important," Hollis said, not wanting to worry her. But Marianne was not fooled. "Someone said something about me, did they not?" Hollis hesitated, then nodded. "I took care of it." Marianne sighed. "You do not have to fight my battles for me, Hollis." "I know," Hollis said, "but I want to. I care about you, Marianne. I cannot just stand by and let people disrespect you." Marianne looked at him for a long moment, and then she reached out and took his hand. "I care about you too, more than I thought I could care about anyone." They walked back to her shack hand in hand, and when they got there, Hollis said, "Marianne, I have been thinking, this situation you are in, living alone, working at the saloon, it is not sustainable. You are wearing yourself out." "I do not have much choice," Marianne said. "I still have debts to pay." "What if there was another way?" Hollis said. "What if you did not have to do this alone?" Marianne looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "What are you saying?" Hollis took a breath. "I am saying I want to marry you. I know it is fast, and I know we have not known each other very long, but I have never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you, Marianne. I want to take care of you. I want to build a life with you." Marianne's eyes filled with tears. "Hollis, I do not have anything to bring to a marriage. No dowry, no land, no money, just debts." "I do not care about any of that," Hollis said. "All I care about is you. Say yes, Marianne, please." Marianne was quiet for a long moment, and Hollis felt his heart hammering in his chest. Then she smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Hollis let out a whoop of joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her, and this time it was not tentative or uncertain. It was a kiss full of promise and hope, and the kind of love that changes everything. They were married 2 weeks later, on a Sunday morning in the little church at the center of town. It was a simple ceremony, attended by a handful of people. Mr. Henderson and his wife, Mrs. Chen, Tom Garrett, and a few of the ranch hands from the Triple H. Marianne wore the blue dress Hollis had bought her, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Hollis had picked that morning. The preacher, an elderly man named Reverend Matthews, performed the ceremony with a gentle smile. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Hollis kissed Marianne in front of everyone, and she laughed against his lips, happy and free, in a way he had never seen her before. After the ceremony, they had a small celebration at the saloon. Tom Garrett had closed the place for the afternoon and set out a spread of food and drink. It was not fancy, but it was heartfelt, and Marianne glowed with happiness as people came up to congratulate them. Mr. Henderson pulled Hollis aside at one point and said, "You did good, son. That girl is lucky to have you." "I am the lucky one," Hollis said, watching Marianne laugh at something Mrs. Chen had said. That night, they went back to Marianne's shack, which was now their shack, at least for the time being. Hollis had already started making plans to build them a proper house on a piece of land he had been saving up to buy, but for now, this would do. They lay together in the narrow bed, Marianne's head resting on Hollis's chest, and talked about the future, about the house they would build, about the children they might have, about the life they would make together. "I never thought I could be this happy," Marianne said softly. "After my father died, I thought I would just be alone forever, barely scraping by." "You are never going to be alone again," Hollis promised. "I am here, and I am not going anywhere." Marianne tilted her head up to look at him. "I love you, Hollis. I do not think I have said that yet, but I do. I love you so much." "I love you too," Hollis said, kissing her forehead, "more than anything." They made love for the first time that night, slow and sweet and full of tenderness. Afterward, Marianne fell asleep in his arms, and Hollis lay awake for a long time, marveling at how his life had changed in just a few short weeks. The next morning, Marianne went to the saloon to tell Tom Garrett she was quitting. He was not surprised. "I figured this was coming," he said, though he did not seem upset. "You are a good worker, Marianne. If you ever need anything, you let me know." "Thank you," Marianne said, "for giving me a chance when I needed it." With Marianne no longer working, they had to be more careful with money. Hollis's wages from the Triple H were enough to cover their basic needs, but not much more. Still, they were happy. Marianne spent her days fixing up the shack, tending the small garden, and trying to make their meager space feel like a real home. Hollis worked long days at the ranch, but he always came home to her, and that made everything worthwhile. A few months after they were married, the owner of the Triple H, a gruff old rancher named Samuel Hicks, called Hollis into his office. "You have been with me for a while now," Samuel said, leaning back in his chair. "You are a good worker, reliable. I have been thinking about promoting you to foreman." Hollis's eyes widened. "Foreman?" "Pay is better," Samuel said. $75 a month, plus you and your wife can live in the foreman's house. It is not much, but it is bigger than what you have got now, and it is on ranch property, so you would not have to ride into town every day. Hollis could hardly believe it. "I do not know what to say, Mr. Hicks." "Say yes," Samuel said with a grin. "And then go tell that pretty wife of yours the good news." Hollis rode back to town faster than he had ever ridden before. He found Marianne in the garden, pulling weeds, and he scooped her up and spun her around just like he had on their wedding day. "What has gotten into you?" Marianne laughed, holding onto his shoulders. "I got promoted," Hollis said. "Foreman, better pay, and we get to live in a house on the ranch. A real house, Marianne, with more than one room." Marianne's eyes went wide. "Are you serious?" "As serious as a heart attack," Hollis said, grinning. Marianne threw her arms around his neck and kissed him hard. "I cannot believe it. Things are finally starting to turn around for us." They moved into the foreman's house the following week. It was not large by any means, but compared to the shack, it felt like a mansion. It had 2 rooms, a separate kitchen, and even a small porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. Marianne cried when she first saw it, and Hollis held her close, promising her that this was just the beginning. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm after that. Hollis worked hard as foreman, managing the other ranch hands and making sure everything ran smoothly. Marianne kept the house, tended a bigger garden now that they had more space, and occasionally helped out with cooking for the ranch hands during busy times like branding season. They grew closer every day, learning each other's habits and quirks, building a partnership that went deeper than just love. They laughed together, argued occasionally about silly things like whether to plant tomatoes or peppers in the garden, and always made up before the sun went down. About a year after they were married, Marianne started feeling sick in the mornings. At first, she thought it was something she ate, but when the sickness persisted for a week, she began to suspect something else. She went to see Dr. Warren, the town physician, and he confirmed what she had already begun to hope. She was pregnant. She told Hollis that evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out. "I have some news," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "What is it?" Hollis asked, taking her hand. "I am going to have a baby," Marianne said. For a moment, Hollis just stared at her, as if he could not quite process what she had said. Then his face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen, and he pulled her into his arms. "A baby," he breathed. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Marianne asked, though she could already see the answer on his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Hollis said. He kissed her, then pulled back to look at her, his eyes shining. "I am going to be a father. You are going to be a mother. This is the best news I have ever heard." They spent the rest of the evening talking about names and what kind of parent they wanted to be and how they would need to add another room to the house. Hollis was already making plans, his mind racing with all the things he needed to do to prepare. Over the next several months, as Marianne's belly grew, Hollis became almost comically protective. He did not want her lifting anything heavy, did not want her working too hard, and fussed over her constantly. Marianne found it both endearing and exasperating, but she loved him for it. The baby, a boy they named Thomas after Marianne's father, was born in the early spring of 1880. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Hollis, waiting outside with Dr. Warren, thought he might lose his mind with worry. But when he finally heard the baby's cry, strong and loud, and was allowed into the room to see Marianne holding their son, he felt like his heart might burst. "He is perfect," Marianne said, looking down at the tiny, squirming bundle in her arms. "He is," Hollis agreed, sitting down carefully on the edge of the bed. He reached out to touch the baby's tiny hand, and when the little fingers curled around his, he felt tears prick his eyes. "Thank you, Marianne. Thank you for this." "We made him together," Marianne said, smiling tiredly. "This is our family, Hollis. You, me, and Thomas." Life with a baby was exhausting in ways they had not anticipated. Thomas was a colicky infant, crying for hours at a time, and there were many nights when Hollis and Marianne took turns walking him back and forth across the room, trying to soothe him. But there were also moments of pure joy. The first time Thomas smiled at them, the way he would grab onto Hollis's finger and hold on tight, the contented sounds he made when Marianne nursed him. As Thomas grew, he became the center of their world. Hollis would come home from work and immediately scoop the boy up, tossing him gently in the air and making him giggle. Marianne would watch them together and feel a deep sense of contentment. This was what she had always wanted, even when she had not known it. A family, a home, a man who loved her completely. When Thomas was about 2 years old, Marianne found out she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and she gave birth to a daughter they named Grace. She had Marianne's auburn hair and Hollis's gray eyes, and from the moment she was born, she had her father wrapped around her little finger. "We are outnumbered now," Hollis joked one evening as he sat on the porch with Thomas on one knee and Grace in his arms. "You would not have it any other way," Marianne said, sitting down beside him. "You are right about that," Hollis agreed, leaning over to kiss her. The years passed, and life on the ranch continued. Thomas grew into a sturdy, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, eager to learn about horses and cattle and everything else that went into running a ranch. Grace was quieter, more thoughtful, with a love for wildflowers and storytelling. Marianne would often find her sitting in the garden, talking to herself and making up elaborate tales about princesses and cowboys and adventures. By the time Thomas was 10 and Grace was 8, the foreman's house had been expanded twice to accommodate their growing family. Hollis had saved enough money to buy a small piece of land adjacent to the ranch, and he and Marianne talked about eventually building their own place there, though they were in no hurry. They were happy where they were, surrounded by friends and the life they had built together. One evening, in the summer of 1890, Hollis and Marianne were sitting on the porch after the children had gone to bed. It was one of those rare, quiet moments when they had time to just be together, and they were savoring it. "Do you ever think about how far we have come?" Marianne asked, leaning her head on Hollis's shoulder. "All the time," Hollis said, wrapping his arm around her. "I still remember the first time I saw you, walking into that saloon in that torn dress. I thought you were the bravest person I had ever seen." Marianne laughed softly. "I was so scared that day. I thought I was going to have to beg for work, and I hated the idea of it, but I was desperate." "I am glad you were," Hollis said. "Otherwise, we might never have met." "I cannot imagine my life without you," Marianne said. "You saved me, Hollis, in every way a person can be saved." "You saved me too," Hollis said. "I was just drifting before I met you, working one ranch after another, never putting down roots. You gave me a reason to stay, a reason to build something. You gave me a home." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the crickets and the distant sound of cattle lowing in the night. Then Marianne said, "I never thanked you properly for the dresses." Hollis looked at her, surprised. "What brought that up?" "I do not know," Marianne said. "I was just thinking about it. Those 3 dresses you bought me, I wore them until they fell apart, and even then, I kept the fabric and made things out of it. Quilts, doll clothes for Grace. I could not bear to throw them away because they meant so much to me." "They were just dresses," Hollis said. "No," Marianne said, shaking her head. "They were not just dresses. They were the first time anyone had ever seen me, really seen me, and cared enough to do something about it. They were the beginning of all of this." She gestured around them, at the house, the ranch, the life they had built. "You did not just give me dresses, Hollis. You gave me hope. You gave me a future. You gave me love." Hollis felt his throat tighten. "I just wanted to take care of you." "And you have," Marianne said. "Every single day since then. You have taken care of me and our children, and you have given us a life I never dreamed was possible." Hollis pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I love you, Marianne. I will love you until the day I die." "I love you too," Marianne said. "Always." As the years continued to roll by, Hollis and Marianne watched their children grow into remarkable young people. Thomas, who had inherited his father's work ethic and his mother's determination, took on more and more responsibility at the ranch. By the time he was 18, he was working as a full-fledged ranch hand, and Samuel Hicks often said that the boy was going to be running the place one day. Grace, at 16, had developed into a talented artist, sketching the landscapes and people around her with a skill that amazed everyone who saw her work. She had also inherited her mother's compassion, often helping out with sick animals or neighbors who needed a hand. She was courted by several young men in town, but she was in no hurry to marry, telling her parents she wanted to see more of the world first. In 1895, when Thomas was 25 and Grace was 23, the family gathered for a special celebration. Samuel Hicks, now in his 70s and ready to retire, had decided to sell the Triple H Ranch to Hollis. It had taken years of saving and careful planning, but Hollis had finally scraped together enough money to make it happen. "I cannot think of anyone better to take over this place," Samuel said at the signing, shaking Hollis's hand firmly. "You have earned this, son. You and your family." Hollis was nearly speechless with gratitude. "I do not know what to say, Mr. Hicks. Thank you." "Do not thank me," Samuel said. Just take care of this place the way I know you will." That night, the family celebrated with a big dinner. Marianne had cooked all of Hollis's favorite foods, and they invited the ranch hands and several friends from town to join them. It was a joyous occasion, full of laughter and toasts and stories about the old days. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Thomas pulled his father aside. "I am proud of you, Pa. You worked so hard for this." "We worked hard for this," Hollis corrected. "All of us. Your mother, you, Grace, everyone who has been part of this ranch. This is not just my achievement, it is ours." Thomas smiled. "I hope I can be half the man you are." "You already are," Hollis said, clapping him on the shoulder, "and you are going to be even better." Later that night, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet, Hollis and Marianne stood together on the porch, looking out over the land that was now officially theirs. "I still cannot believe it," Marianne said. "We own this place, all of it." "It feels like a dream," Hollis agreed. "A really good dream." Marianne turned to look at him, and in the moonlight, Hollis could still see the girl in the torn dress who had walked into his life all those years ago. She was older now, with lines around her eyes and threads of silver in her hair, but she was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "Do you remember what you said to me the day you gave me those dresses?" Marianne asked. Hollis thought back. "I said you deserved to have something nice, something that was just yours." "You gave me so much more than that," Marianne said. "You gave me everything." Hollis pulled her into his arms, holding her close, "and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." They stood there together, wrapped in each other's warmth, and watched as the stars came out one by one, filling the sky with light. It had been a long journey from that scorching day in July of 1878, when a cowboy had seen a girl in need and decided to do something about it. But every step had been worth it, every challenge overcome, every moment of hardship endured, because it had led them here, to this place, this life, this love. Thomas married a girl named Sarah from town a year later, and they built a small house on the property, not far from the main house. Grace eventually fell in love with a traveling photographer who came through Prescott, and after a whirlwind courtship, she married him and moved to San Francisco, though she came back to visit often, bringing sketches of the city and stories of her adventures. Hollis and Marianne became grandparents when Thomas and Sarah had a son they named James, after Hollis. Watching Thomas hold his own child for the first time, seeing the same wonder and joy on his son's face that he had felt when Thomas was born, Hollis was overwhelmed with emotion. "It all goes so fast," he said to Marianne later that day. "One moment you are holding your own baby, and the next you are watching your child hold theirs." "It does," Marianne agreed, taking his hand. "But that is the beauty of it, is it not? Watching it all unfold, seeing the family grow, knowing that the love we built together is being passed down to the next generation." As the new century approached, bringing with it changes and challenges neither of them could have imagined when they first met, Hollis and Marianne remained anchored to each other and to the life they had built. The world was modernizing, with trains and telegraphs and talk of horseless carriages. But on the ranch, life continued much as it always had. Hard work, simple pleasures, and the deep satisfaction of knowing you had built something that would last. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Hollis surprised Marianne with a trip to Tucson. It was the farthest she had ever traveled from Prescott, and she was as excited as a schoolgirl as they boarded the train. They spent 3 days in the city, staying in a hotel that seemed impossibly fancy to both of them, eating in restaurants, and walking through streets that were so different from the dusty roads of home. On their last night there, as they were getting ready for bed, Marianne said, "This has been wonderful, Hollis. Thank you for bringing me here." "You deserve it," Hollis said. "You deserve so much more than I have been able to give you." Marianne shook her head. "Do not say that. You have given me everything that matters, a home, a family, love that has never wavered. What more could I possibly want?" "I just wish I could give you the world," Hollis said. "You did," Marianne said simply. "You gave me my world. You." They made love that night with the same passion and tenderness they had always shared. And afterward, as they lay tangled together in the unfamiliar hotel bed, Hollis thought about how lucky he was. How easily his life could have gone a different direction. How he could have ridden past that saloon on that hot July day and never looked back. But he had not. He had seen a girl who needed help, and something in him had responded, and that single decision had changed everything. When they returned home, life continued its steady rhythm. The ranch prospered under Hollis's management, and the family continued to grow. Grace had 2 children, a boy and a girl, and Thomas and Sarah had 2 more after little James, giving Hollis and Marianne a total of 5 grandchildren who adored them. The grandchildren loved to hear stories about the old days, about when Grandma Marianne had worn the same dress every day, and Grandpa Hollis had bought her new ones. They would beg for the story over and over, and Marianne would tell it, embellishing different details each time, making them laugh. "Tell us about the torn dress, Grandma," the youngest, a girl named Lily, would say, and Marianne would smile and begin, "Well, it was the summer of 1878, and I was as poor as a church mouse. I had one dress to my name, and it was so old and worn that it had a big tear right up the side. I tried to mend it, but it just kept ripping. I thought I would have to wear that torn dress for the rest of my life. But then Grandpa saved you," Lily would say, even though she knew the story by heart. "He did," Marianne would agree, her eyes finding Hollis across the room. "He saw me in that torn dress, and instead of looking past me like everyone else did, he decided to do something about it. He bought me 3 beautiful dresses, and he gave them to me on a Sunday morning. Those dresses changed my life." "Because you married him," Lily would exclaim. "Because I married him," Marianne would confirm, "and we lived happily ever after." It was a simple story, the kind you tell children, but it was also profoundly true. They had lived happily ever after, not because life had been perfect or easy, but because they had chosen each other every single day, through good times and bad, through challenges and triumphs. In the fall of 1905, as Hollis and Marianne were approaching their 70s, they decided it was time to step back from the day-to-day running of the ranch. Thomas was more than ready to take over, and they trusted him completely. They moved into a smaller house on the property, one that Thomas had built for them, and settled into a quieter life. They spent their days sitting on the porch, reading, tending a small garden, and enjoying visits from their children and grandchildren. Marianne had taken up quilting again, and she made beautiful quilts for each of her grandchildren, stitching memories and love into every square. Hollis kept himself busy with small projects around the property, fixing things that did not really need fixing, just because he liked having something to do with his hands. One warm evening in early summer, as they sat together watching the sunset, Marianne said, "Do you have any regrets, Hollis?" Hollis thought about it for a moment, then shook his head. "Not a single one. What about you?" "None," Marianne said. "I have had a good life, a wonderful life, and it is all because of you." "It is because of us," Hollis corrected gently. "We built this together." Marianne smiled. "Yes, we did." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple. The air was filled with the sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cattle, the distant whinny of a horse, the laughter of their grandchildren playing somewhere nearby. "I love you, Marianne," Hollis said, taking her hand. "I have loved you from the moment I saw you, and I will love you forever." "I love you too," Marianne said, squeezing his hand. "Thank you for the dresses, Hollis. Thank you for everything." Hollis leaned over and kissed her, a soft, sweet kiss that held decades of love and devotion. When they pulled apart, they both had tears in their eyes, but they were happy tears. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Hollis and Marianne sat together on their porch, hand in hand, 2 souls who had found each other against all odds and had built a life filled with love, laughter, and the kind of happiness that comes from knowing you are exactly where you are meant to be. The torn dress was long gone, crumbled to dust in some forgotten corner, but the love it had sparked lived on in every member of the family, in every corner of the ranch, in every story told and retold. It was a love that had started with a simple act of kindness and had grown into something beautiful and enduring, something that would continue long after they were both gone. And as they sat there together, watching the night unfold, they knew with absolute certainty that they had lived a life worth living, a love worth cherishing, and a story worth telling for generations to come. Years continued to pass with gentle grace. The ranch remained in the family, a testament to the hard work and dedication that Hollis and Marianne had poured into it. Thomas proved to be an excellent manager, and under his leadership, the Triple H not only survived, but thrived, even as the new century brought changes to the West. The grandchildren grew up strong and capable, each carrying forward the values their grandparents had instilled: hard work, compassion, and the importance of family. Little James, who was not so little anymore, showed a natural talent for working with horses, and by the time he was 20, he was training some of the finest cutting horses in the territory. Lily, the youngest, had inherited her great-aunt Grace's artistic talent and her grandmother Marianne's strength, and she talked about becoming a teacher. Hollis and Marianne celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1918, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The party was held at the main ranch house, and nearly everyone in Prescott showed up to help them celebrate. People brought food, music filled the air, and story after story was shared about the remarkable couple who had built such a legacy. Mr. Henderson, now ancient but still sharp as a tack, pulled himself up to make a toast. I remember the day this young cowboy came into my mercantile, wanting to buy fabric for dresses. He spent nearly every penny he had, and I thought he was the biggest fool I had ever met. He paused as laughter rippled through the crowd. But I was wrong. He was not a fool. He was a man who knew a good thing when he saw it, and he was willing to do whatever it took to make sure she knew she was valued. That is not foolishness. That is wisdom. To Hollis and Marianne, may they have many more years together. Everyone raised their glasses, and Hollis and Marianne stood together, his arm around her waist, her head resting against his shoulder, both of them overwhelmed by the outpouring of love. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Marianne said, "I cannot believe it has been 40 years. "Best 40 years of my life," Hollis said. "Mine too," Marianne agreed. She looked up at him, her eyes still bright despite her age. "Do you think we will have another 40? Hollis laughed. "That would make us both over 100. I do not know if my old bones could handle that." "Then we will take what we can get," Marianne said. "Every day with you is a gift." They were granted another 7 good years together, years filled with simple pleasures: morning coffee on the porch, visits from family, watching the ranch continue to grow and prosper. They moved a little slower, their joints ached more, but their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened, seasoned by time and tested by life. In the spring of 1925, Marianne fell ill. It started as a cold that would not go away, and despite Dr. Warren's best efforts and those of the younger doctor who had taken over his practice, she grew weaker. Hollis barely left her side, sitting in a chair next to their bed, holding her hand, telling her stories about their life together. "Remember the first time I saw you?" he would say. "You walked into that saloon like you owned the place, even though you were wearing that old torn dress. I thought you were the bravest person I had ever seen." "I was terrified," Marianne would whisper back, her voice weak but still warm with affection. "You did not show it," Hollis said. "You never showed fear, even when you had every right to be afraid. That is what made me fall in love with you." The family gathered, knowing the end was near. Thomas and Grace came with their families, filling the small house to bursting. The grandchildren took turns sitting with her, holding her hand, telling her how much she meant to them. On a quiet morning in early May, with Hollis holding her hand and their family surrounding them, Marianne took her last breath. She went peacefully, a small smile on her face, as if she were simply drifting off to sleep. Hollis felt something inside him break. He had known this day would come eventually, but knowing did not make it any easier. He bent over her, pressing his forehead to hers, and whispered, "I love you. I will always love you. Wait for me." The funeral was held 3 days later, and it seemed like the entire town showed up to pay their respects. Marianne was buried in the small cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch, the place she had loved most in the world. The service was beautiful, filled with stories and tears and laughter, as people remembered the woman who had touched so many lives. After everyone had left and the sun was beginning to set, Hollis stood alone at her grave. "I do not know how to do this without you," he said quietly. "You were my whole world, Marianne. How am I supposed to keep going?" But even as he said it, he knew the answer. He would keep going because that is what she would have wanted. He would keep going for their children and grandchildren, for the legacy they had built together, for the love that still lived on, even though she was gone. Hollis lived for another 3 years after Marianne passed. They were not easy years. He missed her with an ache that never quite went away, and the house felt empty without her presence. But he filled his days with family, with working on the ranch as much as his aging body would allow, and with sharing stories about Marianne with anyone who would listen. He made sure the grandchildren and great-grandchildren knew about the torn dress and the 3 new ones he had bought, about how their grandmother had been the strongest person he had ever known, about how a simple act of kindness had blossomed into a love that had lasted a lifetime. In the summer of 1928, Hollis began to feel his own strength failing. He did not fight it. He was ready to go, ready to see Marianne again. He called Thomas and Grace to his bedside and told them how proud he was of them, how much he loved them, how grateful he was for the family they had given him. "Take care of each other," he said. "Take care of this place. Remember where you came from and what it took to build this life. And never forget to love with your whole heart, the way your mother and I loved each other." Thomas and Grace promised through their tears that they would. On a warm evening in late July, 50 years almost to the day after he had first seen Marianne walk into the Silver Spur saloon, James Holloway passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was buried next to Marianne on the hill overlooking the ranch, and at his funeral, his great-grandson James, now a young man, stood up to speak. "My great-grandfather was a man who believed in action," James said. "When he saw someone in need, he did not just feel sorry for them. He did something about it. He saw my great-grandmother in a torn dress, and he made sure she had 3 more by Sunday. That one decision, that one act of kindness, created this." He gestured to the assembled crowd, to the ranch spread out below them, to the family that had gathered to say goodbye. All of this came from love, from a cowboy who saw a girl who needed help and decided she was worth everything he had. That is the legacy he left us. Not just this ranch, not just this family, but the knowledge that love, real love, is an action. It is something you do every single day with your whole heart. As the sun set over the ranch that evening, casting long shadows across the land, the family gathered at the main house for a meal. They shared stories about Hollis and Marianne, laughing and crying, remembering the remarkable people who had started it all. In the years that followed, the ranch continued to prosper. The story of the cowboy and the torn dress became a family legend, passed down from generation to generation. The values that Hollis and Marianne had lived by, hard work, compassion, and unwavering love, became the foundation on which each new generation built their lives. The small house where they had spent their final years together was preserved and eventually turned into a museum of sorts, filled with photographs and mementos from their life. The 3 dresses, or rather the quilts and other items Marianne had made from them, were carefully preserved and displayed, tangible reminders of how everything had begun. Decades later, when the West had changed beyond recognition, when cars had replaced horses and electricity lit up the night, the story of Hollis and Marianne still endured. Their great-great-grandchildren would walk the land they had worked, live in houses built on the foundation they had laid, and tell their own children about the cowboy who had bought 3 dresses for a girl in need. The torn dress was long gone, returned to dust. But what it represented lived on. The transformative power of kindness, the strength that comes from being seen and valued, and the kind of love that does not just survive, but thrives, growing stronger with each passing year. In the end, it was never really about the dresses. It was about a man who saw a woman who needed someone to believe in her, and he chose to be that person. It was about a woman who had been broken down by life but refused to give up, who accepted help when it was offered and built something beautiful from it. It was about 2 people who found each other at exactly the right moment and created a love story that would echo through the generations. Their graves on the hill overlooking the ranch became a place of pilgrimage for the family, a quiet spot where people would come to remember, to reflect, and to draw strength from the legacy of love that Hollis and Marianne had left behind. Fresh flowers appeared there every Sunday, placed by family members who wanted to honor the couple who had given them everything. The ranch itself continued to evolve and change with the times, but the heart of it remained the same. It was a place built on love, sustained by hard work, and enriched by the knowledge that family comes first. The values that Hollis and Marianne had instilled in their children were passed down intact, each generation adding their own chapter to the story, but never forgetting where it all began. On warm summer evenings, you might find members of the family gathered on the porch of the old foreman's house, which still stood strong after all these years. They would sit together as the sun set, watching the land turn gold in the fading light, and someone would inevitably say, "Tell us about the dresses," and whoever was there would smile and begin, "Well, it was the summer of 1878, and there was a girl who wore the same torn dress every single day." And the story would unfold once more, never growing old, never losing its power, because it was more than just a story. It was a testament to the kind of love that changes everything, the kind of love worth fighting for, the kind of love that lasts forever. The cowboy and the girl in the torn dress had been gone for many years, returned to the earth they had loved so well, but their love remained, written in the hearts of their descendants, in the very soil of the ranch, in the enduring legacy of a life well lived and a love that had conquered all. And so, the story ends where it began, with kindness, with courage, and with a love so powerful that it transcended time itself, proving that sometimes the simplest acts of compassion can create ripples that last for generations. That one man's decision to help one woman in need can change not just 2 lives, but hundreds. That love, real and true and steadfast, is the most powerful force in the world. She wore the same torn dress every single day. The cowboy made sure she had 3 more by Sunday. And from that simple beginning, a legacy was born that would endure long after the last star faded from the Arizona sky, long after the desert winds had worn down the mountains, long after everyone who had known them personally had passed on. Because love like theirs does not die. It transforms, it grows, it becomes part of the very fabric of existence, woven into the story of a family, a ranch, and a West that was wild and beautiful and full of possibility. And in the end, that is all that really matters. Not the hardships endured or the struggles overcome, but the love that made it all worthwhile. The love that started with 3 dresses and grew into something eternal, something that would never fade, never diminish, never be forgotten. Their story was complete, their circle closed, their love immortalized not in stone or monument, but in the living, breathing legacy of the family they had created and the lives they had touched. From a torn dress to a dynasty, from desperation to devotion, from strangers to soulmates, Hollis and Marianne had lived a life that mattered, loved with a depth that inspired, and left behind a legacy that would endure forever. The Wild West may have faded into history, but the love story of the cowboy and the girl in the torn dress lived on. A beacon of hope and proof that sometimes, in the most unexpected moments, we find exactly what we need, exactly when we need it. And if we are brave enough to reach for it, we can build something that lasts forever,